a little too pampered when staying at a travel lodge reminds you of the years you spent in supported accommodation. That kind of links in a little bit to what I want to talk about today, which is, obviously it stands to reason that even if you grew up in poverty and you had the visceral experience, that if you escape it or you have some good fortunes that mean that you can climb out of it, then even though you might think you still know what it's like, it doesn't take that long before you begin to forget. Privilege and prosperity certainly has already had a kind of moderating effect on me. And that's what all my thinking is concerned with just now, because ultimately what I'm experiencing in the last year as my economic fortunes and social fortunes have changed is that I feel that pull of the centre ground. I can feel it bearing down upon me. Suddenly, I'm interested because politicians are devising their whole policy approach with people like me in mind. Suddenly, I'm like, oh, they're talking about my tax bracket. Or they're talking about my house price. Or they're talking about my fuel, my energy. Whereas all of these issues used to just go over my head because I thought, that's just a load of middle-class pish. Now, I'm going to read this as fast as I can, but not too fast that it's going to be uninvolving. But I've got a fair bit to get through. I don't usually do reading off of things, but I just want to make sure that I hit my marks. And that's not a political ideological reference that I made there. In autumn of 2018, sorry, last thing, right? Part of the preamble. I think this links in well with Margaret's talk. I think really what this is about is two characters in the story of neoliberalism, or whatever you want to call it. The characters of social mobility and meritocracy. Suspicious characters, if you ask me. In autumn of 2018, I encountered a homeless man named John Diamond during a Facebook Live broadcast I did about mental health. He was someone I knew of but hadn't really spoken to before. In the chat that followed, I learned that John was entangled in a hellish personal crisis. Homeless and hungry, he had been sleeping in a tent which he was forced to move every few days for his own safety. One day, he returned to find it had been confiscated. That day, he contemplated taking his own life. The only reason he hadn't thrown himself in the River Clyde was that he could not bear the thought of leaving behind his beloved dog and faithful companion, Oscar. A few others and I acted quickly, sensing that John's safety was at risk. I sent him a message offering him some money to tide him over for a few days, but he point blank refused. Mate, I don't have a bank account, plus I don't want to take money from anyone, he insisted. I asked him what items he needed. He was not forthcoming. It struck me as odd that he could be so open publicly about his difficulties yet refuse help in the same breath. So embarrassed he was by his run of bad luck that he hadn't even told his friends or family he was sleeping rough. It took a while to talk him round to accepting help. Listen, I have hardly got any clean clothes, he told me. I have been wearing the same jeans for almost 2 weeks, so I might stink a bit, as I have not showered in weeks. He then added, but my wee lifesaver Oscar does not care. He is always with me no matter what. We tracked him down to Byres Road in the heart of Glasgow's West End, where he spent his afternoons begging. He grudgingly accepted some cash, clothing and food. This simple act of kindness invigorated John, who was ashamed that he had fallen so far. He was trapped in the awful, life-threatening purgatory between desperation and pride. Unable to refuse charity but deeply pained by the indignity of accepting it. Despite being criminally neglected by the authorities, the police and the council, John, who had fallen as far as a person can, never blamed anyone else for his predicament, not his family, not his friends, not even the society that turned its back on him. I wonder if I can read this with my glasses off. Make the text a wee bit bigger, right? If I start looking like I'm getting a migraine. Others, upon hearing his story, hijacked his misfortune to make uninformed, self-serving points about immigrants. But John was no fool. He was perhaps never more alive when venting his spleen furiously at far-right charlatans like Tommy Robinson and Katie Hopkins, who have made a cottage industry out of such misplaced and radioactive resentments. It was not long before John marshalled the strength to begin pulling himself out of the quicksand of absolute poverty towards the dry land of recovery. Nearer the end of the year, we invited him to a gig at the Barrowlands in Glasgow. He was very anxious, having spent so long in social isolation. As painful as loneliness can be, it offers many an alluring familiarity, security and predictability, especially those struggling with addiction or mental health problems. So we tried to make it as simple as possible for John to attend. He seemed fresh-faced and optimistic. Hope was breathed into his injured spirit by those who had extended love and compassion to him, unconditionally and without judgment. I looked forward to reconnecting with him after Christmas, satisfied that he was no longer in danger. Within 2 months, I was staring in disbelief through bitter tears at John's coffin. His heartbroken parents, inconsolable, as Somewhere Over the Rainbow played their boy out for the final time. Before the curtains drew slowly to their agonising and inevitable close, I'm told Oscar was rehoused with a family near a beach. For a staffy with boundless energy to burn and grief of his own to process, that is a very positive result. Though I suspect Oscar will leap with excitement for many years at every creak of the door and every throw of the ball, in keen anticipation of seeing his best friend John again one day. Life is short. The hour of death is always unknown. Attending funerals with increasing regularity is, for many, nature's way of reminding us that the curtains are always closing in. That time is the most precious commodity and mustn't be allowed to dwindle like warm sand between our fingers through soft and careless living. Sadly, for too many, funerals are really about celebrating long lives well lived, but about mourning another needless, preventable death. Then there are those who wish for death, driven to the brink of abject despair, not by circumstances that they themselves have created, but by government policies that were apparently designed to help them. Policies which, if this is possible to imagine, are experienced even more acutely by women than men like John. A few years ago, I encountered a young woman in a similar personal crisis. Her name is Kerry. She had until that point been in a violent relationship with a man. Having seen her posting about it, I contacted her to ask if there was any support that I could offer. It was a typical story. She fell head over heels for a seemingly charming guy, but over time he became more controlling and abusive. She suffered regular physical violence as well as emotional abuse. Cruel verbal onslaughts designed to obliterate her self-esteem until she genuinely believed she was deserving of such treatment. Having fled the relationship, in which hard drugs were an ongoing issue for both, she was experiencing what many women do when they attempt to escape an abuser: more abuse. A woman's risk of being murdered multiplies the second she leaves, and given her ex-partner's violent history, she had every reason to fear for her safety. Gradually, she pieced her life back together by getting clean and back into work. Every now and then I checked in on her. Some time passed and I assumed everything was okay until one day I noticed a message she left on a thread asking someone for help to get home from work late at night. I contacted her. It turned out she had recently been raped and was experiencing anxiety travelling to and from her job. The impact of the attack on her mental health eventually led Kerry to becoming unemployed. Then a run of misfortune threw her into a tailspin. Her landlord passed away suddenly and she became homeless. The stress led to a short relapse, which made her even more vulnerable. Kerry kept going. She found temporary accommodation and applied for universal credit. Disturbingly, for increasing numbers of people, Accessing this hellish benefit is where the real problems begin. She's currently stuck in the hellish 6-week limbo between applying and getting money, accessing food banks, often spending her nights cold and hungry. I truly believe she's at high risk of taking her own life. Having been sexually assaulted, she is anxious about using public transport in case she is confronted by one of her many abusers. The services she must access are often far from her hostel, meaning she requires taxis which drive up her living costs. Even accessing the services set up to help her carries a risk. She shared with me a WhatsApp message from a male addictions worker asking her if she wanted to have sex. Many other men whom she has asked for help have asked for sexual favours in return. This deviance has been referred to as survival sex in the news, the latest nebulous term masking the behaviour of predatory men who use power to take advantage of a woman at her most vulnerable. What disturbs me is how a social welfare system designed to provide a safety net for people like Kerry is testing her will to live and placing her at risk of yet more sexual abuse and psychological harm. She is a woman who has always worked, a survivor of gender-based violence and an addict in early recovery, yet the slightest slip following a recent assault has left her at square one on the slippery snakes and ladders board we call civilised society. In both cases, and countless others, I did my utmost to help wherever I could, but the scale of the task at hand, where some lives are concerned, is beyond the expertise or indeed the resource of any one person or organisation. The problems faced by increasing numbers in Britain go far beyond the realm of self-help or attitudinal change. Indeed, the gulf between those on the sharp end of fluctuations in the economy and the political decisions taken as a result have brought us to a point where decision makers, despite what you have to believe are good intentions, lack the necessary experience and visceral understanding to truly address the social problems of the 21st century. Post-industrial Britain is in the grip of a feverish malaise. Like me, many who enjoy various degrees of prosperity and the social mobility it generates, a section of society has all but peeled away from those near the bottom. The ravine that cuts through Britain partitions the winners from the losers, the powerful from the powerless. I find myself caught in the middle, drawn to a simpler life, where all I need care about is my own family and securing their quality of life, and the world I have only just escaped, characterised by ill health, social deprivation, and an absence of opportunity. The only thing more ironic than making a shed load of money from writing a book about poverty is that the book cautioned those on the sharp end of this inequality against the impulse to unrestrained and toxic anger, when in truth, I have never been more furious. Social mobility is dead. The final nail in the coffin came in the spring of 2019, confirming what anyone who has been paying attention already knows in their gut. In the 6th State of the Nation report in this many years, the UK government's own Social Mobility Commission found that social mobility has stagnated over the last 4 years at virtually all stages from birth to work. It confirmed what is often dismissed as a working class conspiracy theory, that being born privileged in Britain means that you are likely to remain privileged, while being born disadvantaged means that you will have to overcome a series of barriers to ensure that you and your children are not stuck in the same trap. The report could not be any clearer. The ludicrous, self-serving notion that has been peddled by pampered politicos for decades, that Britain is a meritocratic society where hard work and playing by the rules will get you somewhere, is nothing short of a bare-faced lie. A claim which is so demonstrably false, yet stubbornly held to be true by so many, that this utterly false belief meets the necessary criteria as to be classed as a superstition. Yet this belief persists and passes into the realm of fact, utterly unconstrained by the lack of evidence for it, because those of a higher social caste, for whom reality itself is no barrier, will it so. Repeat after me. There is no such thing as social mobility. How odd it is then that so many of us never shut up about it. And we talk about social mobility like it's a real thing, like it's a car that has broken down and not a tooth fairy myth. This petulant refusal to discard the term altogether in recognition that it's a falsehood is one of the biggest barriers to truly addressing the problem. For how can we perceive, discuss, or tackle it when we cannot even properly describe it? The term social mobility is a carefully crafted feat of impenetrable jargon, a linguistic parlour trick which, when deployed, makes the person saying it feel deeply knowledgeable, despite the fact that using such a phrase with a straight face does nothing but broadcast, in the highest possible definition, the infuriating ignorance of many who regard themselves as deeply informed. The most obvious absurdity can be found in the term itself and what it's designed to express. Merely the phrase social mobility possesses a kinetic quality, implying movement of some kind. The phrase is deployed so regularly and with such conviction that we simply presume social mobility is real and that it must be going on somewhere. The phrase is used innumerably in the public, private and third sectors and has become the preferred way of acknowledging the existence of class disparity to the extent that such discussion will even be tolerated. History won't be kind to the term social mobility. Our grandchildren may look back in horror and wonder how on earth we could have entertained such nonsense. Then again, the politically correct term for elderly people used to be invalids, which is now rightly regarded as deeply offensive. I fear social mobility will one day find itself consigned to the linguistic scrap heap for similar reasons. The term social mobility, as a political tool, makes an abstraction of the lived experiences of millions of men, women and children who, despite their best efforts, are struggling to get a foothold in society. It renders inconsequential the customs, rules, laws, institutions and power structures that reproduce inequality as a toxic byproduct. When you read the word social mobility has stagnated, it doesn't elicit much but a sigh of resignation. It's hardly an impassioned call to action. This is by design. Social mobility, we are to believe, is something that lives on the other side of a hill. A sleeping giant which must be carefully awoken from its slumber by experts who understand such things. The same experts who, despite their own findings, continue to refer to it as if it actually exists. And then we're just going to skip forward a little bit. To get a better idea of what social immobility, which is what we should be calling it from now on, and I urge you all to bin the term social mobility and begin using the term social immobility, because it's a far more accurate and useful thing to say. To get a better idea of what it means for someone on the lower end of the social scale living in conditions of poverty, characterised by stress, the threat of violence, financial insecurity, simply imagine being submerged in a pool of quicksand. In this context, social mobility is straining every sinew just to keep your head above the sand, while politicians cite your neck as evidence that society works, and socially ambivalent voters who think poverty is a personality defect point to the quicksand as evidence that society is fair. The depth of the swamp, how you got there, and the means by which you might escape such a dangerous indignity are never accounted for. The central dilemma being submerged in quicksand is that your survival depends on your ability to remain completely still, on not moving in any direction whatsoever for the rational fear that you may become terminally submerged. Poverty is more than a lack of money. It's a lack of opportunity and a lack of means to create opportunity. Where opportunities do exist, poverty inhibits the ability to capitalise, because social manoeuvrability is contingent on having at least some margin for error, some safety net to catch you if you fall. From the apex of the pyramid, a failure to ascend in some way is regarded as the consequence of a lack of aspiration. Such an assumption is typical of those who have never had to traverse quicksand. It is not that aspiration is lacking, but that it is constrained by unfavourable circumstances that profoundly alter a person's sense of possibility, a person's sense of risk. when every single day you expend all of your energy just to languish in one spot and you always get nowhere? What is there to aspire to beyond that immediate, all-encompassing predicament of survival? It's here that comforting notions of merit and aspiration run haplessly aground on the hard rock of objective reality. As public school conservatism continues to dominate the political horizon, such myths are exposed for all to see. Do we seriously think that any of the candidates who put themselves forward to become Prime Minister have come within spitting distance of Downing Street solely on their ability or competence? This is the dangerous delusion that cuts to the heart of the political crisis in the UK. Most politicians who rise to positions of national consequence are passionate advocates of the meritocracy, a borderline superstitious belief that individual ability and not circumstance is why people end up either in Downing Street, homeless, hungry, or dead. It must be acknowledged that the meritocratic society is a beautiful idea. The notion that barriers must be removed to allow individuals to rise based on effort and ability played a role in advances like free education, increased equality for women, ethnic minorities, and other disadvantaged groups. The problem with meritocracy is when those who faced no such barriers, having risen to the top of society thanks to favourable circumstances, believe in their bones that they ascended because they deserved to. Which brings me finally to Boris. I know you don't like politicising things, but I also know why I get invited to these things. Impervious to both scandal and scrutiny, Johnson says and does things every day that would send most careers into a tailspin. He has never been held to any standard. Like so many of his peers, he lives in a world free from consequence. When Boris inevitably slithers into number 10, it won't be because he is deserving of the privilege. For all that is written about Johnson's lack of impulse control, it's his unrestrained mediocrity that defines him. He is a hero and a poster child to those who confuse privilege with talent and self-advocacy for basic competence. Funnily enough, Boris also believes in the meritocratic society. If his political ascent has achieved one positive thing, it's been to lay this self-serving myth completely meritless. Thank you very much.